The Berlin Wall was a barrier that divided Berlin from 1961 to 1989. Constructed by the German Democratic Republic, starting on 13 August 1961, the wall completely cut off West Berlin from surrounding East Germany and from East Berlin until government officials opened it in November 1989. Its demolition officially began on 13 June 1990 and was completed in 1992. The barrier included guard towers placed along large concrete walls, which circumscribed a wide area that contained anti-vehicle trenches, fakir beds, and other defenses. The Eastern Bloc claimed that the wall was erected to protect its population from fascist elements conspiring to prevent the will of the people in building a socialist state in East Germany. In practice, the wall served to prevent the massive emigration and defection that had marked East Germany and the Communist Eastern Bloc during the post-World War II period. The Berlin Wall was officially referred to as the Anti-Fascist Protective Wall by GDR authorities, implying that the NATO countries and West Germany in particular were considered equal to fascists by GDR propaganda. The West Berlin city government sometimes referred to it as the Wall of Shame, a term coined by Mayor Willy Brandt while condemning the wall's restriction on freedom of movement, along with the separate and much longer inner German border, which demarcated the border between East and West Germany. It came to symbolize a physical marker of the Iron Curtain that separated Western Europe and the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. Before the wall's erection, 3.5 million East Germans circumvented Eastern Bloc emigration restrictions and defected from the GDR, many by crossing over the border from East Berlin into West Berlin, from which they could then travel to West Germany and other Western European countries. Between 1961 and 1989, the wall prevented almost all such emigration. During this period, around 5,000 people attempted to escape over the wall, with an estimated death toll ranging from 136 to more than 200 in and around Berlin. In 1989, a series of radical political changes occurred in the Eastern Bloc, associated with the liberalization of the Eastern Bloc's authoritarian systems and the erosion of political power in the pro-Soviet governments in nearby Poland and Hungary. After several weeks of civil unrest, the East German government announced on 9 November 1989 that all GDR citizens could visit West Germany and West Berlin. Crowds of East Germans crossed and climbed onto the wall, joined by West Germans on the other side in a celebratory atmosphere. Over the next few weeks, euphoric people and souvenir hunters chipped away parts of the wall. The governments later used industrial equipment to remove most of what was left. Contrary to popular belief, the wall's actual demolition did not begin until the summer of 1990 and was not completed until 1992. The fall of the Berlin Wall paved the way for German reunification, which was formally concluded on 3 October 1990. Background: post-war Germany. After the end of World War II in Europe, what remained of pre-war Germany west of the Oder-Neisse line was divided into 4 occupation zones, each one controlled by one of the 4 occupying Allied powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, France and the Soviet Union. The capital of Berlin, as the seat of the Allied Control Council, was similarly subdivided into 4 sectors despite the city's location, which was fully within the Soviet zone. Within 2 years, political divisions increased between the Soviets and the other occupying powers. These included the Soviets' refusal to agree to reconstruction plans making post-war Germany self-sufficient and to a detailed accounting of the industrial plants, goods and infrastructure already removed by the Soviets. Britain, France, the United States and the Benelux countries later met to combine the non-Soviet zones of the country into one zone for reconstruction and to approve the extension of the Marshall Plan, Eastern Bloc and the Berlin Airlift. Following World War II, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin headed a union of nations on his western border, the Eastern Bloc, that then included Poland, Hungary and Czechoslovakia, which he wished to maintain alongside a weakened Soviet-controlled Germany. As early as 1945, Stalin revealed to German communist leaders that he expected to slowly undermine the British position within the British occupation zone, that the United States would withdraw within a year or two, and that nothing would then stand in the way of a united communist Germany within the bloc. The major task of the ruling Communist Party in the Soviet zone was to channel Soviet orders down to both the administrative apparatus and the other bloc parties, which in turn would be presented as internal measures. Property and industry was nationalized in the East German zone. If statements or decisions deviated from the described line, reprimands and punishment would ensue, such as imprisonment, torture and even death. Indoctrination of Marxism-Leninism became a compulsory part of school curricula, sending professors and students fleeing to the West. The East Germans created an elaborate political police apparatus that kept the population under close surveillance, including Soviet SMERSH secret police. In 1948, following disagreements regarding reconstruction and a new German currency, Stalin instituted the Berlin blockade, preventing food, materials and supplies from arriving in West Berlin. The United States, Britain, France, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and several other countries began a massive airlift, supplying West Berlin with food and other supplies. The Soviets mounted a public relations campaign against the Western policy change. Communists attempted to disrupt the elections of 1948, preceding large losses therein, while 300,000 Berliners demonstrated for the international airlift to continue. In May 1949, Stalin lifted the blockade, permitting the resumption of Western shipments to Berlin. The German Democratic Republic was declared on 7 October 1949. By a secret treaty, the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs accorded the East German state administrative authority, but not autonomy. The Soviets penetrated East German administrative, military and secret police structures and had full control. East Germany differed from West Germany, which developed into a Western capitalist country with a social market economy and a democratic parliamentary government. Continual economic growth starting in the 1950s fueled a 20-year economic miracle, as West Germany's economy grew, and its standard of living steadily improved. Many East Germans wanted to move to West Germany. Emigration westward in the early 1950s after the Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe at the end of World War II. The majority of those living in the newly acquired areas of the Eastern Bloc aspired to independence and wanted the Soviets to leave, taking advantage of the zonal border between occupied zones in Germany. The number of GDR citizens moving to West Germany totaled 187,000 in 1950, 165,000 in 1951, 182,000 in 1952, and 331,000 in 1953. One reason for the sharp 1953 increase was fear of potential further Sovietization, given the increasingly paranoid actions of Joseph Stalin in late 1952 and early 1953. 226,000 had fled in just the first 6 months of 1953. Erection of the inner German border. By the early 1950s, the Soviet approach to controlling national movement, restricting emigration, was emulated by most of the rest of the Eastern Bloc, including East Germany. The restrictions presented a quandary for some Eastern Bloc states, which had been more economically advanced and open than the Soviet Union, such that crossing borders seemed more natural, especially where no prior border existed between East and West Germany. Up until 1952, the demarcation lines between East Germany and the Western occupied zones could be easily crossed in most places. On the 1st of April 1952, East German leaders met the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin in Moscow. During the discussions, Stalin's foreign minister Vyacheslav Molotov proposed that the East Germans should introduce a system of passes for visits of West Berlin residents to the territory of East Berlin, free movement of Western agents in the GDR. Stalin agreed, calling the situation intolerable. He advised the East Germans to build up the border defenses, telling them that the demarcation line between East and West Germany should be considered a border, and not just any border, but a dangerous one. The Germans will guard the line of defense with their lives. Consequently, the inner German border between the two German states was closed, and a barbed wire fence erected. The border between the western and eastern sectors of Berlin, however, remained open, although traffic between the Soviet and the western sectors was somewhat restricted. This resulted in Berlin becoming a magnet for East Germans desperate to escape life in the GDR, and also a flashpoint for tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. In 1955, the Soviets gave East Germany authority over civilian movement in Berlin, passing control to a regime not recognized in the West. Initially, East Germany granted visits to allow its residents access to West Germany. However, following the defection of large numbers of East Germans under this regime, the new East German state legally restricted virtually all travel to the West in 1956. Soviet East German Ambassador Mikhail Pavukan observed that the presence in Berlin of an open and essentially uncontrolled border between the socialist and capitalist worlds unwittingly prompts the population to make a comparison between both parts of the city, which unfortunately does not always turn out in favor of the democratic Berlin. Berlin emigration loophole. With the closing of the inner German border officially in 1952, the border in Berlin remained considerably more accessible then because it was administered by all four occupying powers. Accordingly, Berlin became the main route by which East Germans left for the West. On the 11th of December 1957, East Germany introduced a new passport law that reduced the overall number of refugees leaving Eastern Germany. It had the unintended result of drastically increasing the percentage of those leaving through West Berlin from 60% to well over 90% by the end of 1958. Those caught trying to leave East Berlin were subjected to heavy penalties, but with no physical barrier and subway train access still available to West Berlin, such measures were ineffective. The Berlin sector border was essentially a loophole through which Eastern Bloc citizens could still escape. The 3.5 million East Germans who had left by 1961 totaled approximately 20% of the entire East German population. An important reason that the West Berlin border was not closed earlier was that doing so would cut off much of the railway traffic in East Germany. Construction of a new railway bypassing West Berlin, the Berlin Outer Ring, commenced in 1951. Following the completion of the railway in 1961, closing the barrier became a more practical position. brain drain. The emigrants tended to be young and well-educated, leading to the brain drain feared by officials in East Germany. Yuri Andropov, then the CPSU director on relations with communist and workers' parties of socialist countries, wrote an urgent letter on 28 August 1958, to the Central Committee about the significant 50% increase in the number of East German intelligentsia among the refugees. Andropov reported that, while the East German leadership stated that they were leaving for economic reasons, testimony from refugees indicated that the reasons were more political than material. He stated, "The flight of the intelligentsia has reached a particularly critical phase," and East German said propaganda booklet published in 1955 dramatically described the serious nature of flight from the Republic, both from the moral standpoint as well as in terms of the interests of the whole German nation. Leaving the GDR is an act of political and moral backwardness and depravity. Those who let themselves be recruited objectively serve West German reaction and militarism, whether they know it or not. Is it not despicable when, for the sake of a few alluring job offers or other false promises about a guaranteed future, one leaves a country in which the seed for a new and more beautiful life is sprouting, and is already showing the first fruits, for the place that favors a new war and destruction? Is it not an act of political depravity when citizens, whether young people, workers, or members of the intelligentsia, leave and betray what our people have created through common labor in our republic to offer themselves to the American or British secret services, or work for the West German factory owners, junkers, or militarists? Does not leaving the land of progress for the morass of an historically outdated social order demonstrate political backwardness and blindness? Workers throughout Germany will demand punishment for those who today leave the German Democratic Republic, the strong bastion of the fight for peace, to serve the deadly enemy of the German people, the imperialists and militarists. By 1960, the combination of World War II and the massive emigration westward left East Germany with only 61% of its population of working age, compared to 70.5% before the war. The loss was disproportionately heavy among professionals, engineers, technicians, physicians, teachers, lawyers, and skilled workers. The direct cost of manpower losses to East Germany has been estimated at $7 billion to $9 billion, with the East German party leader Walter Ulbricht later claiming that West Germany owed him $17 billion in compensation, including reparations as well as manpower losses. In addition, the drain of East Germany's young population potentially cost it over $22.5 billion marks in lost educational investment. The brain drain of professionals had become so damaging to the political credibility and economic viability of East Germany that the resecuring of the German Communist frontier was imperative. The exodus of emigrants from East Germany presented two minor potential benefits: an easy opportunity to smuggle East German secret agents to West Germany, and a reduction in the number of citizens hostile to the communist regime. Neither of these perks, however, proved particularly useful. Construction begins, 1961. On 15 June 1961, First Secretary of the Socialist Unity Party and GDR State Council Chairman Walter Ulbricht stated in an international press conference, "Niemand hat die Absicht, eine Mauer zu errichten." It was the first time the colloquial term Mauer had been used in this context. The transcript of a telephone call between Nikita Khrushchev and Ulbricht on 1 August in the same year, suggests that the initiative for the construction of the wall came from Khrushchev. However, other sources suggest that Khrushchev had initially been wary about building a wall, fearing negative Western reaction. What is beyond dispute, though, is that Albrecht had pushed for a border closure for quite some time, arguing that East Germany's very existence was at stake. Khrushchev had been emboldened by U.S. President John F. Kennedy's tacit indication that the U.S. would not actively oppose this action in the Soviet sector of Berlin. On Saturday, the 12th of August 1961, the leaders of the GDR attended a garden party at a government guest house in Dolmsee, in a wooded area to the north of East Berlin. There Albrecht signed the order to close the border and erect a wall. At midnight, the police and units of the East German Army began to close the border, and by Sunday morning, the 13th of August, the border with West Berlin was closed. East German troops and workers had begun to tear up streets running alongside the border to make them impassable to most vehicles and to install barbed wire entanglements and fences along the 156 kilometers around the three western sectors, and the 43 kilometers that divided West and East Berlin. The barrier was built inside East Berlin or East German territory to ensure that it did not encroach on West Berlin at any point. Generally, the wall was only slightly inside East Berlin, but in a few places it was some distance from the legal border, most notably at Potsdamer Bahnhof and the Lenne Triangle that is now much of the Potsdamer Platz development. Later, the initial barrier was built up into the wall proper, the first concrete elements and large blocks being put in place on the 17th of August. During the construction of the wall, National People's Army and combat groups of the working-class soldiers stood in front of it with orders to shoot anyone who attempted to defect. Additionally, chain fences, walls, minefields and other obstacles were installed along the length of East Germany's western border with West Germany proper. A huge no-man's land was cleared to provide a clear line of fire at fleeing refugees. Immediate effects with the closing of the east-west sector boundary in Berlin. The vast majority of East Germans could no longer travel or emigrate to West Germany. Berlin soon went from being the easiest place to make an unauthorized crossing between East and West Germany to being the most difficult. Many families were split, while East Berliners employed in the West were cut off from the jobs. West Berlin became an isolated exclave in a hostile land. West Berliners demonstrated against the wall, led by the mayor Willy Brandt, who strongly criticized the United States for failing to respond. Allied intelligence agencies had hypothesized about a wall to stop the flood of refugees, but the main candidate for its location was around the perimeter of the city. In 1961, Secretary of State Dean Rusk proclaimed, "The wall certainly ought not to be a permanent feature of the European landscape. I see no reason why the Soviet Union should think it is to their advantage in any way to level that monument to communist failure." United States and UK sources had expected the Soviet sector to be sealed off from West Berlin, but were surprised by how long the East Germans took for such a move. They considered the wall as an end to concerns about a GDR Soviet retaking or capture of the whole of Berlin. The wall would presumably have been an unnecessary project if such plans were afloat. Thus they concluded that the possibility of a Soviet military conflict over Berlin had decreased. The East German government claimed that the wall was an anti-fascist protective rampart intended to dissuade aggression from the West. Another official justification was the activities of Western agents in Eastern Europe. The Eastern German government also claimed that West Berliners were buying out state-subsidized goods in East Berlin. East Germans and others greeted such statements with skepticism, as most of the time, the border was only closed for citizens of East Germany traveling to the west but not for residents of West Berlin traveling to the east. The construction of the wall had caused considerable hardship to families divided by it. Most people believed that the wall was mainly a means of preventing the citizens of East Germany from entering or fleeing to West Berlin. Secondary response: the National Security Agency was the only American intelligence agency that was aware that East Germany was to take action to deal with the brain drain problem. On the 9th of August 1961, the NSA intercepted an advance warning information of the Socialist Unity Party's plan to close the intra-Berlin border between East and West Berlin completely for foot traffic. The Interagency Intelligence Berlin Watch Committee assessed that this intercept might be the first step in a plan to close the border. Quote, "This warning did not reach U.S. President John F. Kennedy until noon on the 13th of August 1961, while he was vacationing in his yacht off the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport, Massachusetts. While Kennedy was angry that he had no advance warning, he was relieved that the East Germans and the Soviets had only divided Berlin without taking any action against West Berlin's access to the West. However, he denounced the Berlin Wall, whose erection worsened the relations between the United States and the Soviet Union. In response to the erection of the Berlin Wall, a retired General, Lucius D. Clay, was appointed by Kennedy as his special advisor and sent to Berlin with ambassadorial rank. Clay had been the military governor of the U.S. zone of occupation in Germany during the period of the Berlin blockade and had ordered the first measures in what became the Berlin Airlift. He was immensely popular with the residents of West Berlin, and his appointment was an unambiguous sign that Kennedy would not compromise on the status of West Berlin. Clay and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson arrived at Tempelhof Airport on the afternoon of Saturday, the 19th of August 1961. They arrived in a city defended by 3 Allied brigades, one each from the UK, the US, and France. On the 16th of August, Kennedy had given the order for them to be reinforced. Early on the 19th of August, the 1st Battle Group 18th Infantry was alerted. On Sunday morning, U.S. troops marched from West Germany through East Germany, bound for West Berlin. Lead elements, arranged in a column of 491 vehicles and trailers carrying 1,500 men, divided into 5 march units, left the Helmstedt-Marienborn checkpoint at 6:34. At Marienborn, the Soviet checkpoint next to Helmstedt on the West German-East German border, U.S. personnel were counted by guards. The column was 160 kilometers long, and covered 177 kilometers from Marienborn to Berlin in full battle gear. East German police watched from beside trees next to the Autobahn all the way along. The front of the convoy arrived at the outskirts of Berlin just before noon, to be met by Clay and Johnson, before parading through the streets of Berlin in front of a large crowd. At 4 o'clock on the 21st of August, Lyndon Johnson left West Berlin in the hands of General Frederick O. Hartel and his brigade of 4,224 officers and men. Every 3 months for the next 3.5 years, a new American battalion was rotated into West Berlin. Each traveled by Autobahn to demonstrate Allied rights. The creation of the wall had important implications for both German states. By stemming the exodus of people from East Germany, the East German government was able unable to reassert its control over the country. In spite of discontent with the wall, economic problems caused by dual currency and a black market were largely eliminated. The economy in the GDR began to grow. But the wall proved a public relations disaster for the communist bloc as a whole. Western powers portrayed it as a symbol of communist tyranny, particularly after East German border guards shot and killed would-be defectors. Such fatalities were later treated as acts of murder by the reunified Germany.